Nothing happens to anybody which he is not fitted by nature to bear. These words from Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who ruled Rome during some of its most turbulent years, echo across centuries with a quiet power. Imagine standing at the edge of an empire's collapse, watching the world you knew crumble, the institutions that once seemed unshakable dissolving like sand. This wasn't just a hypothetical scenario for Marcus Aurelius. It was his reality, and yet, through it all, he and countless others found an unshakable anchor in Stoic philosophy. History is littered with the ruins of great civilizations: Rome, Byzantium, the Han Dynasty, each a reminder that even the mightiest structures can fall. But beneath those ruins, there's another story, one less often told: how ordinary people, guided by ancient Stoic principles, managed not just to survive chaos, but to thrive within it. Stoicism wasn't just a philosophy for quiet contemplation. It was a survival toolkit forged in the fires of real-world crisis. When empires collapsed, when borders shifted, when the familiar turned foreign, Stoics leaned on three core ideas: acceptance of what couldn't be changed, relentless focus on what they could control, and the discipline to transform fear into resilience. These weren't abstract concepts, they were lifelines. Picture a merchant in Constantinople as the city walls were breached, or a scholar in Rome as the libraries burned. While the world around them unraveled, Stoic wisdom offered something rare: clarity. It taught them to distinguish between the storm outside and the stillness within, to see adversity not as a threat, but as a test of character. So here's a question that feels achingly relevant today. What if the same principles that steadied minds centuries ago could help us navigate our own age of uncertainty? Modern life might not involve barbarian invasions or collapsing empires, but it's full of its own upheavals: economic instability, social fragmentation, the dizzying pace of change. The Stoics understood something fundamental about human nature. Our greatest battles aren't against external forces, but against our own reactions to them. How do we stay grounded when everything feels like it's shifting? How do we cultivate calm in the middle of chaos? The answers lie in a philosophy that's been road-tested by history itself. This isn't just about looking backward. It's about uncovering timeless strategies for living wisely, no matter what the world throws your way. The Stoics saw the rise and fall of empires not as tragedy, but as nature's rhythm, as predictable as the changing seasons. Seneca, writing in the twilight of Rome's golden age, put it bluntly: whatever can happen at any time can happen today. He wasn't being pessimistic. He was pointing to a liberating truth. When we stop clinging to the illusion of permanence, we free ourselves from the terror of loss. Think of the Roman merchant who watched the Visigoths sack his city in 410. Instead of despair, he might have remembered Seneca's advice: fortune takes away only what she gave. His wealth, his status, even his homeland, none were truly his to begin with. They were on loan from the universe, and the universe was simply calling them back. This radical acceptance wasn't passivity. It was a strategic shift in perspective. By recognizing that everything from grand empires to daily comforts is temporary, Stoics trained themselves to invest in the only thing that couldn't be taken away: their character. Consider the story of Thrasea Paetus, a senator who continued studying philosophy calmly as Nero's agents came to execute him. While others panicked, he saw the moment for what it was: an opportunity to prove that a mind grounded in virtue fears no external change. So what does this mean for us today? Look around. The institutions, technologies, and social norms we take for granted are just as fragile as Rome's marble temples once seemed. The Stoics would ask, where are you placing your sense of security? In a job title, a bank account, a political system? None are immune to the tides of time. But here's the paradox they uncovered. When you stop demanding certainty from the world, you find an unshakable certainty within yourself. Try this exercise, one Seneca himself practiced. Each morning, rehearse losing what you cherish. Not to dwell on dread, but to awaken to the reality that clinging is the source of suffering, not the loss itself. What attachments might you loosen today to breathe a little freer, no matter what storms come tomorrow? Epictetus, born a slave and later one of history's most influential Stoic teachers, framed life's greatest challenge with startling simplicity. Some things are within our power, while others are not. This dichotomy of control wasn't just philosophy, it was a survival strategy for those living through the unraveling of empires. Picture two citizens of Rome as the Goths poured through the city gates. One frantically tries to barricade his home, screaming at the inevitability of the invasion. The other gathers his family, secures what provisions he can, and focuses on protecting only what's within his reach. Both face the same catastrophe, but one is exhausted by resistance to reality, while the other conserves energy for meaningful action. History's darkest hours reveal this pattern again and again. When Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453, Byzantine scholars didn't waste energy cursing the siege engines. They smuggled ancient texts to safety, preserving wisdom that would later ignite the Renaissance. Their power lay not in stopping the cannons, but in choosing how to meet the moment. Fast forward to modern recessions. You can't single-handedly reverse a stock market crash, but you can control whether you panic sell assets or calmly reassess your financial strategy. The Stoic distinction isn't about surrender. It's about redirecting effort from futile resistance to purposeful adaptation. Consider the paralyzing weight of trying to control the uncontrollable. The Roman senator who obsesses over imperial corruption he can't reform burns out in rage, while his Stoic counterpart focuses on maintaining integrity in his own dealings. Both witness the same decline, but one is crushed by it, the other energized by small, daily victories. Modern parallels abound. You might not stop corporate layoffs, but you can upskill during stable times. You can't force a pandemic to disappear, but you can build healthier habits while waiting it out. The secret isn't indifference, it's the profound relief of releasing what was never yours to command. So where does this leave us when systems falter? Start with Epictetus' morning ritual. Mentally catalog what's truly yours to govern, your judgments, your efforts, your values, everything else opinions of others, market fluctuations, even the stability of nations belongs to the realm of externals. This mental sorting isn't nihilism, it's the ultimate empowerment. When the Byzantines lost their capital, they didn't lose their identity. Greek scholars became treasured tutors in Italian courts, transforming defeat into cultural transmission. Chaos doesn't erase agency, it reveals where our agency actually lies. The next time you're overwhelmed by forces beyond your control, ask this: what would Epictetus conserve his energy for? Not the storm, but the steering of his own ship. Amor Fati, the love of fate. This isn't just resignation to what happens, it's an active embrace, a deliberate choice to see every twist, every setback as fuel for growth. Centuries after the Stoics, Friedrich Nietzsche would call it the ultimate test of a life well lived. My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, not merely to bear what is necessary, but to love it. But long before Nietzsche, Marcus Aurelius was already living this principle. Facing rebellions, plagues, and the slow unraveling of Rome's dominance, he wrote in his private journal, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." For him, crisis wasn't an interruption of life. It was the very material life provided to practice courage, patience, and resilience. History brims with leaders who turned collapse into catalyst. Take Julian the Apostate, Rome's last pagan emperor, who inherited a bankrupt empire and an army riddled with desertions. Instead of despairing, he used the chaos as a chance to reinvent governance, cutting bureaucracy, leading from the front lines, and reviving civic virtue. Or Lady Trieu, the Vietnamese warrior who, as Chinese invaders overran her homeland in the 3rd century, didn't just resist. She built a rebellion that became legend, declaring, "I'll ride the storm, tread the dangerous waves, not resign myself to ordinary life." These weren't Pollyanna optimists, they were realists who understood, fate hands you stones, you decide whether to stumble or build, now bring this home. That problem gnawing at you, the job loss, the strained relationship, the health scare, what if it's not an obstacle but an invitation? The Stoics would urge you to ask, where is the hidden curriculum here? What muscle of character could this challenge help you strengthen? A business owner watching markets crumble might discover their true calling isn't in profits but in mentoring others. A parent facing a child's illness could uncover depths of patience they never knew they had. Amor Fati flips the script. Don't just accept the storm, learn to dance in the rain. The Roman statesman Cato, when mocked for his outdated integrity, replied, "I'd rather be right than be king." His defiance wasn't stubbornness, it was a masterclass in valuing what lasts over what's fleeting. So here's the challenge. Pick one current struggle, something that feels like a weight. Now ask, how could this very situation sculpt me into someone wiser, kinder, or more resilient? The Byzantines didn't choose the Ottoman cannons, but they chose to preserve knowledge. Marcus didn't choose barbarian invasions, but he chose to model calm leadership. Your power lies not in rewriting fate's script, but in mastering your role within it. After all, the oak tree doesn't resent the wind that bends it. That resistance is what makes its roots grow deeper. Picture waking every morning and immediately confronting your deepest fears, not to dwell in dread, but to disarm their power. This was the Stoic practice of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, a mental fire drill for the soul. Seneca, writing as Rome's economy teetered, advised his students to regularly visualize losing everything, wealth, status, even loved ones, not to invite despair but to expose a startling truth, that most of what we fear losing was never truly ours to keep. The merchants of Constantinople didn't wait for Ottoman cannons to breach the walls before contemplating defeat. They rehearsed it in their minds, so when the moment came, they could act with clarity rather than collapse in shock. This practice wasn't morbid rehearsal, it was emotional inoculation. By regularly visiting the worst-case scenario in their imagination, Stoics built an immunity to panic. Consider the Roman farmer who pictured his crops failing. When drought came, he'd already grieved the loss, freeing him to focus on solutions, negotiating with neighbors, rationing stores, finding alternative work. Meanwhile, his unprepared neighbor spiraled into paralysis. The Stoics understood what modern psychology confirms: visualizing adversity reduces its emotional charge. It's why astronauts train for equipment failures, or why firefighters drill for worst-case scenarios. When disaster strikes, their minds recognize the terrain. Seneca took this further, revealing a hidden gift in negative visualization. It transforms ordinary moments into treasures. He robs present ills of their power, he wrote, who has perceived their coming beforehand. Imagine two senators enjoying a feast on the eve of Rome's decline. One obsesses over rumors of barbarian movements, unable to savor his wine. The other, having long accepted imperial fragility, drinks deeply, knowing this could be his last cup. Both face the same uncertainty, but one is poisoned by it while the other is freed to relish what's here. Here's the paradox at play. By routinely imagining loss, Stoics cultivated a fiercer appreciation for the present. A Byzantine scholar might stroke his scrolls each evening, whispering these could burn tomorrow. Far from depressing him, this ritual made his nightly studies glow with urgency and meaning. Modern experiments in mental contrasting echo this. When people visualize both their goals and potential obstacles, they engage more fully in the pursuit. The athlete who pictures injury trains more mindfully. The entrepreneur who anticipates failure builds more resilient systems. So how might this ancient practice steady your hands when life trembles? Start small. Before your next important meeting, pause to ask, what's the worst that could reasonably happen? Not to dwell on it, but to notice how your body reacts, then watch as the imagined catastrophe loses its fangs. Or try this evening ritual. As you lock your front door, briefly acknowledge it could be your last night in this home. Sounds dark, yet those who do this often report an unexpected side effect. They start noticing the way sunlight slants through their windows or the warmth of their partner's laugh with fresh intensity. The Stoics weren't teaching us to expect doom. They were handing us a lens to see ordinary life as the miracle it is. History often remembers rulers for their conquests or failures, but Marcus Aurelius carved his legacy in how he governed while Rome frayed at the edges. His private journal, later known as Meditations, reads like a battle plan for ethical leadership in impossible times. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be, he wrote. Be one. While lesser emperors hoarded gold or schemed against rivals, Aurelius focused on what he called his inner citadel, the unassailable fortress of character no invading army could breach. When plague decimated Rome's population, he didn't retreat to his villas. He sold imperial treasures to fund relief efforts and personally visited the sick, knowing full well the risk. Stoic leadership wasn't about grand gestures. It was about doing the next right thing, even when no one was watching. Compare this to emperors like Commodus, his own son, who inherited a strained empire and accelerated its collapse through extravagance and paranoia. Where Aurelius saw responsibility, Commodus saw entitlement. The difference wasn't circumstance. Both faced crises but philosophy. One leader asked, "What does virtue require?" The other demanded, "What pleasure can I seize?" This contrast plays out through history. Byzantine Emperor Justinian rebuilt Constantinople's grandeur after riots burned half the city, while Nero famously fiddled, or more likely, sang during Rome's Great Fire. The Stoic leader's edge, recognizing that true power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering one's own impulses. Modern leadership often mirrors these ancient failures. How many CEOs chase quarterly profits while ignoring employee burnout? How many politicians stoke division to mask their inability to solve real problems? Aurelius would have recognized the pattern. When systems weaken, the desperate cling to illusions of control, while the wise focus on what endures. His journal entries repeat one theme like a mantra: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Imagine applying this to today's boardrooms or governments. A Stoic leader facing economic turmoil wouldn't scapegoat subordinates or manipulate stock prices. They'd audit their own decisions first, asking, "Have I been disciplined with resources? Have I prepared my team for uncertainty?" When the Han Dynasty collapsed, officials like Zhu Liang didn't waste energy blaming warlords. They stabilized provinces through fair taxation and merit-based promotions. Their playbook matched Aurelius: fix what's within your sphere, accept what isn't, and let integrity be the compass. The test of Stoic leadership reveals itself in small moments. When Marcus Aurelius learned of a general's betrayal, he didn't order executions. He summoned the man and said, I need your talents more than I need revenge. Compare that to modern leaders who publicly shame dissenters on social media. The Stoic approach doesn't ignore wrongdoing, it confronts it with clarity, not emotion. Byzantine Empress Theodora, facing a mob ready to overthrow her husband, didn't flatter or flee. She declared, "Purple makes a fine shroud," meaning she'd rather die as empress than live in cowardice. That unflinching resolve, rooted in premeditatio malorum, stopped the rebellion cold. So what would Stoic leadership look like in your world? Whether you're running a company, a classroom, or a household, the principles scale. Start with the morning ritual Aurelius practiced. Greet the day by naming the challenges you'll face, not to dread them, but to rehearse how you'll meet them with patience and principle. When emails pile up or tempers flare, ask the Stoic question, what's truly mine to govern here? The project deadline that's shared with your team, your preparation and attitude. Those are yours alone. This mindset turns chaos into curriculum, every setback a chance to model the resilience you hope to inspire. The irony, leaders who adopt this philosophy often outlast their flashier rivals. Aurelius ruled for 19 years through wars and plagues, while Commodus lasted barely 12 before assassination. The lesson echoes across millennia. Systems crumble, but the leader who builds their foundation on self-awareness and service leaves something sturdier than statues. They leave a template for how to lead when everything falls apart. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who had known the harshness of slavery before teaching in Rome's bustling streets, offered a surprising insight. What belongs to you cannot be taken from you, and this includes your ability to choose kindness, even when the world chooses cruelty. At first glance, Stoicism might seem like a solitary pursuit, a fortress of self-reliance, but dig deeper, and you'll find its teachings pulsing with a quiet emphasis on community. When empires crumbled, it wasn't just individuals leaning on Stoic principles. It was entire networks of people who discovered that resilience multiplies when shared. The very word Stoic comes from the stoa poikile, the painted porch in Athens where Zeno's students gathered to debate. Philosophy wasn't meant to be practiced in isolation. It was a collective lifeline. History's upheavals reveal this truth in action. During Rome's decline, Stoic circles became underground wells of stability. Senators, merchants, and freedmen met in homes to discuss texts by lamplight, not as escapism, but to reinforce the values that outlasted legions: justice, courage, mutual aid. When plagues emptied public squares, these groups organized burial brigades. When inflation made coins worthless, they bartered skills, a doctor treating a teacher's child in exchange for lessons. Epictetus, despite his fame, lived simply in a small house with a chronically ill companion. When students offered to buy him better quarters, he refused, saying, "If you wish to help me, share in my hardships rather than remove them." This wasn't martyrdom, it was a radical recognition that burdens lighten when carried together. The Byzantine Empire's collapse offers a striking example. As Ottoman forces closed in, scholars at the Pantocrator monastery didn't hoard their manuscripts. They smuggled them westward through risky networks, ensuring Aristotle and Plato wouldn't be lost to siege fires. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens formed neighborhood watches, not just against invaders, but to prevent looting and protect the vulnerable. Their motto might as well have been Marcus Aurelius' reminder: "We are made for cooperation, like feet, like hands, like eyelids." Fast forward to modern crises. During the 2008 financial crash, credit unions rooted in community ethics weathered the storm better than giant banks. In Japanese villages after the 2011 tsunami, survivors who'd practiced kizuna, the bond of mutual care, rebuilt faster than those waiting for distant bureaucracies. The pattern holds: chaos doesn't dissolve communities. It reveals which bonds are transactional and which are transformative. So how do we cultivate this kind of interconnected resilience today? Start small. A Stoic study group isn't about memorizing quotes. It's about creating a space where people can ask, how are you really navigating this challenge? Imagine co-workers sharing not just spreadsheet tips, but strategies for maintaining focus during layoffs. Or parents trading not just babysitting favors, but wisdom on raising grounded kids in anxious times. Epictetus' disciple Arion recorded this teaching: when you see a man distressed, don't say, it's his problem. Say, it's our problem. How can my steadiness become his shelter? The Stoics knew something modern science confirms: we regulate each other's nervous systems. A calm voice in a panicked room is contagious. When the Roman historian Tacitus described the eruption of Vesuvius, he noted how Pliny the Elder's composed orders saved lives, not because the ash wasn't deadly, but because his presence helped others think clearly. Today, this might look like the neighbor who starts a tool-sharing coup during supply shortages, or the manager who transparently acknowledges market fears while mapping pragmatic next steps. Here's the invitation. Identify one circle where you can plant seeds of Stoic community. Maybe it's initiating a monthly dinner where friends discuss not just problems, but the philosophies that help them cope. Or volunteering with groups that embody practical wisdom, like disaster response teams or mentorship programs. The goal isn't to build a fortress against the world, but a garden where resilience can grow, where the question isn't, how do I survive? But how do we flourish? Because when the ground shakes, it's the intertwined roots that hold the forest upright. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher whose lectures attracted both senators and slaves in first-century Rome, once posed a piercing question to his students: if you lost everything but your virtue, would you truly be poor? At a time when empires rose and fell on the whims of trade routes and barbarian raids, this wasn't hypothetical. It was survival wisdom. While Roman elites hoarded gold in vaults, Stoics practiced a radical idea: that real wealth couldn't be stored in chests, only in character. When economic collapses came, as they always did, those who'd internalized this truth faced ruin with something rare: a quiet sense of freedom. History offers vivid examples. During Rome's 3rd century crisis, when inflation made coins worthless enough to be thrown into the Tiber, Stoic-aligned families didn't just lament their vanished fortunes. They'd already been training for this moment. Like modern minimalists before their time, they'd adopted Rufus' advice to eat simply, dress plainly, and take pride in needing little. One merchant, recorded in the letters of Pliny the Younger, famously sold his villas and silks to fund a school after realizing his children could lose their inheritance to a pirate attack, but never their education. This wasn't austerity for its own sake, it was strategic detachment. By loosening their grip on material security, they'd discovered a paradox: having less to lose made them more resilient to chaos. The contrast with their contemporaries was stark. While the Emperor Valerian taxed citizens into poverty to fund doomed wars, Stoic circles bartered skills and knowledge. A teacher might trade philosophy lessons for a blacksmith's repairs, or a midwife's services for a farmer's grain. Rufus called this the economy of mutual need, where value flowed not from coins stamped with fading emperors' faces, but from the irreducible worth of human capability. Fast forward to Byzantium's fall. Scholars who'd memorized entire texts could rebuild libraries from memory, while silk merchants clutching their unraveling inventories stood helpless. Modern psychology confirms what the Stoics intuited. Studies on financial crises show that those who define self-worth beyond net worth through relationships, skills, or purpose experience less stress during economic downturns. A 2009 study of recession-era workers found that individuals with strong, non-material identities, artists, volunteers, mentors, adapted faster than those who tied their entire sense of security to jobs or investments. The Stoic approach wasn't about rejecting money, but about refusing to let it become the foundation of their inner citadel. So where does this leave us in an age of volatile markets and algorithmic layoffs? Start with Rufus' nightly reflection. What did I rely on today that money didn't provide? Maybe it was a friend's advice that solved a problem no app could fix, or the satisfaction of fixing a leaky faucet yourself instead of calling a handyman. These aren't small comforts, they're the first threads of a safety net woven from competence and connection. The merchant who traded silks for a school knew this. His wealth didn't disappear, it transformed into something no invading army could plunder, the minds of the next generation. Imagine applying this mindset now. That promotion you didn't get, it stings, but it can't erase the skills you honed chasing it. The crashed cryptocurrency, it was always speculative, but your ability to analyze markets remains. The Stoics would urge you to conduct an audit not of your bank statements, but of your intangible assets. What knowledge have you accumulated that no one can repossess? What relationships have you nurtured that don't fluctuate with interest rates? When the Byzantines packed their most precious belongings before the Ottoman siege, the wise didn't grab gold. They took books, tools, and heirloom seeds. They understood Rufus' deepest lesson. Poverty isn't the absence of things, but the absence of the ability to create value from within. This shift in perspective turns scarcity into a clarifying force. Just as forests need occasional fires to clear undergrowth and release nutrients, economic collapses, personal or societal, can burn away illusions about what truly sustains us. The Roman matron who traded her jewels for a vineyard didn't become poorer. She became someone who could feed her community. The modern professional who loses a job but discovers a talent for teaching isn't failing. They're being redirected toward a more resilient form of wealth. The question isn't whether external supports will fail, but whether you've cultivated the inner resources to rebuild when they do. Stoicism often gets mistaken for fatalism, that quiet surrender to whatever life throws your way. But here's the crucial difference. Stoics didn't just accept fate. They engaged with it like a sculptor engages with marble, chiseling meaning from the unyielding stone. Epictetus, the former slave-turned-philosopher, put it bluntly: don't demand that events happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do, and you will go on well. At first glance, that might sound like giving up. But look closer, his words aren't about passivity. They're about redirecting energy from fruitless resistance to purposeful action within the space you actually control. Take the fall of Rome. While fatalists saw the empire's collapse as inevitable and did nothing, Stoic-minded citizens like Symmachus worked tirelessly to preserve what mattered. When barbarians cut off grain shipments, he didn't just lament the famine, he organized communal kitchens. When libraries burned, he didn't shrug at the loss of knowledge. He funded scribes to copy surviving texts. His acceptance wasn't resignation. It was clarity, the kind that separates what's truly uncontrollable, the invasion, from what's still within reach, feeding the hungry, saving wisdom. This is Stoicism in action, eyes wide open to reality, hands busy shaping what can still be shaped. History brims with these contrasts. During the Black Death, fatalists locked themselves away or turned to superstition, waiting to die. But Stoic-inspired physicians like Gentile Dofoligno risked infection to document symptoms and trial treatments, knowing full well they might perish. Their notebooks later saved countless lives. The difference: fatalism says, why bother? Stoicism asks, what's mine to do? Even in the shadow of the gallows, Stoic prisoners like Seneca wrote letters to comfort loved ones, turning their final hours into lessons on courage. So how does this play out today? Imagine two employees during a corporate downsizing. The fatalist thinks it's hopeless, management doesn't care, and mentally checks out. The Stoic acknowledges the layoffs are beyond their control but asks, what skills can I sharpen while I'm still here? Who can I network with? One sees a dead end, the other spots hidden alleyways leading forward. The Stoic might even draft contingency plans, knowing that while they can't stop the layoffs, they can control their readiness. Epictetus trained his students to practice this discernment daily. The captain decides when to sail, he'd say, but once on board, it's your job to stay seaworthy. Ancient sailors couldn't command the winds, but they could adjust the sails, just like the Byzantine merchants who, when Ottoman blockades choked trade routes, pivoted to crafting exquisite maps for new markets. They didn't control the blockades, but they controlled their adaptability. Here's the challenge: pick one area where circumstances feel immovable, a strained relationship, a stagnant career, a societal issue. Now apply the Stoic sieve. What truly can't you change? Accept that fully, not with despair, but to free up mental bandwidth. Then spotlight what's still in your hands. Maybe you can't single-handedly fix healthcare, but you can advocate for a local clinic. You might not revive a broken marriage, but you can choose to part with dignity. The merchant who saved scrolls instead of silver during Constantinople's fall understood this. Legacy isn't about controlling history's tide. It's about planting seeds that outlast the flood. Cato the Younger, the Roman senator whose name became synonymous with Stoic discipline, would walk through Rome's streets barefoot in winter, wearing only a thin tunic while others bundled in cloaks. He'd deliberately eat plain meals of bread and water, even when feasts were offered. To outsiders, this seemed like pointless suffering, but Cato understood a profound truth: comfort is a cage. By voluntarily embracing discomfort, he was inoculating himself against the day when hardship would come uninvited. The Stoics called this ascesis, not self-punishment, but a training regimen for the soul, like an athlete preparing for the Olympics by lifting heavier weights than they'd face in competition. This practice wasn't about masochism, it was about sovereignty. Consider the Roman general who trained his army to march long distances without water, not to deprive them, but to ensure they could outlast enemies when supplies ran low. Or the Byzantine monks who intentionally slept on stone floors to cultivate the resilience needed for their perilous mission of preserving texts during invasions. They weren't waiting for fate to test them, they were preemptively building calluses on their minds and bodies. Fast forward to modern Navy SEAL training, where recruits voluntarily endure freezing swims and sleep deprivation to forge the mental toughness required in combat. The principle remains unchanged. Voluntary discomfort is the down payment on future resilience. Today, we've engineered a world that actively eliminates friction. Smartphones deliver dopamine hits on demand, apps promise instant gratification, and climate-controlled homes shield us from even minor temperature fluctuations. Yet this comfort comes at a cost. Studies show that people who avoid all discomfort become paradoxically more fragile when faced with inevitable stressors. Like an immune system that's never exposed to germs, an untested psyche crumbles at the first sign of adversity. The Stoic antidote: prescribe yourself small, deliberate doses of hardship. Start with something as simple as a cold shower, not to prove your toughness, but to practice sitting with discomfort without fleeing. Or try a digital Sabbath, one day a week where you silence notifications and reclaim attention from algorithms hungry for your clicks. These aren't deprivations, they're rehearsals for the moments when life forces disconnection upon you. The entrepreneur who practices frugality during boom times isn't being cheap. They're stress testing their ability to thrive with less before a recession demands it. The brilliance of voluntary discomfort lies in its scalability. Cotto didn't start by sleeping on rocks. He began by foregoing extra olive oil at dinner. Modern equivalents might look like taking the stairs instead of the elevator, or having that difficult conversation you've been avoiding rather than numbing the tension with distractions. Each small act strengthens the neural pathways that say, "I can handle this." When the Byzantines faced siege, those accustomed to modest rations adapted faster than the aristocrats who'd never missed a gourmet meal. So here's the challenge. Identify one comfort you'll intentionally disrupt this week. Maybe it's waking up 30 minutes earlier to journal before the world makes demands on your attention. Or resisting the urge to outsource a household repair, not because you'll do it perfectly, but to relearn the satisfaction of self-reliance. The goal isn't to romanticize suffering, but to dissolve the illusion that ease equals safety. As Seneca wrote while exiled to Corsica, fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling. By choosing to walk toward difficulty, we ensure it never has the power to drag us. Marcus Aurelius never intended his personal journal to become one of history's most enduring works of philosophy. Those private pages, now known as meditations, were simply his nightly ritual, a way to steady his mind while ruling an empire under siege. What makes them remarkable isn't their eloquence, but their raw honesty. Here was the most powerful man in the world, confessing his doubts, reprimanding his own anger, and rehearsing Stoic principles like a student preparing for an exam. "You have power over your mind, not outside events," he scribbled, not as a lofty proclamation, but as a reminder to himself during plague outbreaks and military revolts. This is the essence of Stoic journaling, not documenting events but dialoguing with your own soul amid the storm. The act of writing by hand, slowing thoughts to the speed of ink, forces clarity in ways mental reflection alone cannot. When barbarian tribes crossed the Danube, Marcus didn't just fret over battle strategies. He wrote questions to himself. What part of this fear is within my control? What virtue can I practice here? Modern neuroscience confirms what he stumbled upon. Journaling reduces amygdala activation, literally dialing down the brain's panic response. A 2005 study found that patients who journaled about traumatic events showed improved immune function. The Byzantines, inheriting this practice, called it the medicine of reflection. When their city burned during riots, scholars like Sellos didn't just record the damage, they wrote through their grief to find the lessons beneath the ashes. Try this tonight with one Stoic prompt borrowed from Marcus. What about this situation depends on me? Not a vague, "how do I feel?" but a targeted excavation of agency. The Roman general facing a mutiny might have written, "I can't control their rebellion, but I can control whether I respond with cruelty or fairness." A modern professional during layoffs could journal, "I can't dictate the CEO's decisions, but I can update my resume and reach out to 3 contacts." The power lies in the pivot from passive victimhood to active ownership. Marcus' journal reveals another technique, third-person perspective. When you wake reluctant to rise, he wrote, "Remember, you were made for action." That subtle shift from "I don't want to "you were made for" creates psychological distance, allowing us to advise ourselves like a wise mentor. During Constantinople's final nights, the historian Doukas described citizens using this method, writing letters to their future selves. When you read this, remember that fear is always worse than the thing itself. Here's where most journaling fails. We chronicle complaints without seeking antidotes. Marcus modeled the remedy. For every observed weakness, prescribe a Stoic virtue. After noting his irritation with a senator's incompetence, he immediately countered, "But justice demands I see his efforts, not just his failures." Modern studies on implementation intentions show this exact pattern pairing problems with if-then responses boosts resilience. Your turn, spot a recurring frustration in your entries, then draft a Stoic rebuttal. If my coworker takes credit again, then I'll focus on producing work so good it can't be ignored. The darkest pages of Meditations hold its brightest wisdom. Marcus wrote them while grieving his mentor's death, not with platitudes but by rigorously dissecting his sorrow. Is this pain for him or for my own loneliness? This emotional autopsy cuts through grief's fog. When plague took his children, he journaled not to escape the pain, but to locate its edges. What part of this is natural? What part is my resistance to nature? The Byzantine Princess Anna Komnene, losing her empire to crusaders, used the same method, writing, "My tears water no crops. My wailing rebuilds no walls." Your journal needn't be eloquent. Marcus wasn't. His entries are fragmented, repetitive, even messy. What mattered was the daily excavation of truth. Tonight, borrow his simplest prompt. What did I postpone today out of fear? Not to shame yourself, but to spot avoidance patterns. The Roman farmer delaying crop rotation due to storm fears might realize he's risking greater future famine. Your deferred dental visit or difficult conversation follows the same pattern. The page holds up a mirror, revealing where comfort is masquerading as wisdom. One final practice from the Stoic scribes, gratitude as armor. Marcus listed simple gifts: bread to chew, water to swallow, a cloak against cold, not as naive positivity, but tactical awareness of resources. Byzantine monks fleeing with manuscripts would journal 3 survival tools they still possessed each night: my hands to copy texts, my memory to preserve them, my legs to carry them west. In your own journal, try this twist. What do I still control that no crisis can take? Maybe it's your ability to learn, to adapt, to choose kindness when others choose panic. That's the real gift of Stoic journaling, not just weathering the storm, but mapping the unshakable ground beneath your feet. Seneca once described fear as a tax the mind pays on things that may never come due. For a man who lived through earthquakes, political purges, and the erratic reign of Nero, this wasn't empty reassurance, it was hard-won wisdom. The Stoics didn't dismiss uncertainty as irrational. They saw it as the ultimate testing ground for reason. When rumors spread through Rome that barbarian hordes were days away from the gates, Seneca advised his students to conduct what he called a preemptive trial, to interrogate their fears as if cross-examining a witness. Ask yourself, he wrote, what evidence exists beyond whispers? What action can you take regardless? This method wasn't about denying danger, but about refusing to let imagination outrun reality. Compare this to the panic that gripped Constantinople as Ottoman forces advanced. Some citizens swore they'd seen omens in the stars. Others spread tales of secret tunnels beneath the walls. The Stoic-minded among them did something radical. They weighted each claim against observable facts. Did the stars really foretell doom, or were people projecting their anxiety onto the sky? Were there actually tunnels, or was the story amplifying fear? Modern psychology confirms this approach. Studies show that probability calibration, assessing how likely a feared event really is, reduces anxiety more effectively than reassurance. The Roman who checked supply routes instead of staring at the horizon wasn't ignoring risk. He was anchoring himself in the measurable present. Today's information age magnifies this challenge. Ancient rumors traveled by torchlight. Modern ones circle the globe in seconds. During the 2020 toilet paper shortages, fear spread faster than any virus. Stoicism would prescribe a double remedy. First, distinguish between preparation and panic. Stocking up on essentials is rational. Hoarding years' worth of supplies is fear masquerading as action. Second, trace the fear to its root. Is your worry about job loss really about finances or the deeper dread of lost purpose? Seneca's letters reveal this pattern. Surface fears are often proxies for existential ones. The merchant afraid of shipwrecks might actually fear proving inadequate to his family's needs. Here's the exercise he assigned. Write down your worst-case scenario, then break it into what's certain, what's probable, and what's purely speculative. When plague struck Rome, the Stoic physician Galen used this method. Certain, people would die. Probable, quarantine could slow the spread. Speculative, whether he'd be among the victims. This clarity let him focus on treatable symptoms rather than dread. Apply this to modern unknowns: that looming layoff. Certain, industries evolve. Probable, your skills have transferable value. Speculative, whether this particular company will let you go. Reason doesn't promise safety, but it reclaims agency from chaos. Now consider how differently two people face the same uncertainty. During Rome's civil wars, one senator hoarded gold in his villa, jumping at every knock. Another, trained in Stoicism, secured modest savings but invested in alliances with level-headed colleagues. When the crisis passed, the hoarder was bankrupt not financially but socially, having alienated everyone with his paranoia. The Stoic, he'd built something no army could confiscate: a network of trust. This mirrors modern research on uncertainty tolerance. Those who fixate on absolute security often make poorer decisions than those who accept ambiguity and focus on adaptable plans. So take Seneca's challenge. Name one future event that haunts you, not vaguely write its details, then apply the Stoic sieve. What aspects can you influence? What's beyond control? The Byzantines couldn't stop Ottoman cannons, but they could decide which manuscripts to save. You might not prevent a recession, but you can diversify your skills. The goal isn't to eliminate fear, but to outmaneuver it, to let reason, not dread, dictate your next move. As Seneca reminded his friend Lucilius, the man who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive. Stoic compassion sounds like an oxymoron to those who mistake the philosophy for emotional detachment. But the ancient Stoics weren't advocating heartlessness. They were architects of a different kind of tenderness, one that could withstand collapse without crumbling. Hierocles, a Stoic philosopher of the 2nd century, visualized this with his famous circles of concern. Picture a series of rings radiating outward. At the center, yourself, then family, neighbors, fellow citizens, and finally all humanity. The practice. Gradually draw those outer circles inward, not to neglect your own needs, but to recognize that in another's suffering, you're witnessing a piece of your own humanity. This wasn't abstract theory. During Rome's grain shortages, Stoic families were known to share their meager rations with strangers, citing Hierocles' teaching. To treat a foreigner as a fellow citizen is to make the world your polis. History's darkest hours reveal this principle in action. When Mount Vesuvius buried Pompeii in ash, it wasn't the wealthy elites who organized rescue parties. It was the local Stoic community, led by former slave Epictetus students. They dug alongside distraught neighbors, not with platitudes, but with shovels and shared silence. Centuries later, as Constantinople burned during the Fourth Crusade, Byzantine monks risked their lives to carry not just sacred texts, but orphaned children to safety. Their mantra echoed Marcus Aurelius: "What harms the hive harms the bee." Modern psychology confirms this ancient insight. Altruism isn't just morally commendable, it's a survival strategy. Studies show that communities practicing mutual aid recover faster from disasters, and individuals who volunteer during crises report lower rates of depression. Yet Stoic compassion differs from sentimental pity. Consider the physician Galen during Rome's Antonine Plague. While others fled or wailed over unstoppable deaths, He methodically recorded symptoms, trained makeshift nurses, and comforted the dying, not with empty assurances but with presence. "Tears don't cure fever," he wrote, "but a steady hand might." This embodies the Stoic balance: empathy without enmeshment, care without collapse. Fast forward to the 2020 pandemic, where frontline workers adopted similar practices, donning PPE not just for self-preservation, but to remain effective channels of care. So how do we cultivate this resilient compassion today? Start with hierarchical circles. Identify someone in your outer ring, a colleague you barely know, a struggling single parent in your neighborhood. Then take one small step to pull them closer. Could you offer a grocery run to an elderly neighbor during a heat wave? Mentor a junior coworker amid layoff rumors? The Stoics would remind you, you don't need boundless energy to help, just the willingness to act within your current capacity. When the philosopher King Marcus Aurelius distributed his imperial wealth during a famine, he didn't bankrupt the treasury. He calculated what he could spare without compromising his ability to govern, proving that sustainable compassion requires boundaries. Here's the paradox the Stoics uncovered. By grounding yourself first, you become a more reliable source of support for others. Like an oak tree deepening its roots to better shelter those beneath its branches, Epictetus, though disabled in his later years, hosted nightly dialogues where soldiers and slaves alike could voice their fears. He didn't absorb their pain, he held space for it, demonstrating that true strength isn't a wall against emotion, but a well that refills even as it gives. Try this modern adaptation of hierarchical exercise. Sketch your circles, then pick one person from an outer ring each week, not to solve their problems, but to acknowledge their humanity. A handwritten note to a distant relative, a coffee shared with the office cleaner. The goal isn't grand gestures, but the quiet realization that resilience grows best when rooted in connection. After all, the Stoics who survived empire's end didn't do so as isolated hermits. They endured as knots in a net, individual strands woven into something no storm could entirely break. Marcus Aurelius scrawled a simple command in his journal that became a lifeline for generations: confine yourself to the present. At first glance, it sounds deceptively simple, until you consider the context. He wrote those words not in peaceful retreat, but while commanding legions on the Danube frontier, where every day brought reports of barbarian movements, supply shortages, and soldier unrest. What looks like platitude was actually battle-tested strategy. The Stoics understood something modern neuroscience now confirms. Our brains are prediction machines, constantly projecting into futures that may never come, draining today's energy for tomorrow's imagined catastrophes. By anchoring awareness in the now, they weren't ignoring reality. They were reclaiming the only ground where action is possible. Consider the Roman watchman stationed at Hadrian's Wall as Pictish raiders gathered in the distance. He could spend his shift speculating about every possible attack route, exhausting himself with what-ifs. Or he could focus on the immediate tasks, testing his sword's edge, checking the signal fires, noting the wind direction. Both men face the same threat, but one is paralyzed by futures that haven't arrived, while the other conserves energy for what actually demands response. This is Stoic mindfulness in action, not passive acceptance but tactical presence. The practice took practical forms. Roman Stoics began each morning with a ritual called the view from above, standing still to inventory their immediate surroundings before projecting into the day's uncertainties. A senator might note the cool marble beneath his feet, the weight of his wool cloak, the sound of servants preparing breakfast, not as escapism, but to reboot his senses in tangible reality before confronting volatile debates in the Senate. Modern special forces use a similar technique called grounding. When ambushed, soldiers are trained to quickly name 3 things they see, 2 they hear, 1 they feel, a sensory anchor that prevents panic from hijacking focus. Here's where most attempts at mindfulness stumble. We mistake it for vague relaxation when the Stoics framed it as precise reconnaissance. Epictetus instructed students to conduct hourly reality checks. What am I actually holding right now? A wax tablet, a stylus, not my fears about tomorrow's exam. The Byzantine scholar Sellos adapted this during Constantinople's sieges, describing how he'd pause mid-chaos to study the grain of the table he was writing on, not to deny the danger outside, but to remember that in this exact moment, his hands could still preserve knowledge. Try this reframe next time future anxieties arise. That looming deadline or medical test result, ask yourself, right now at 10:32 on Tuesday, is the feared event happening? If not, you're paying interest on a debt that may never come due. The Stoics would urge you to distinguish between preparation, studying for the exam, and preoccupation, rehearsing failure scenarios during dinner. When plague struck Rome, sensible citizens stored clean water and herbs. The paralyzed one stared at the horizon, waiting for symptoms that might never appear. Marcus Aurelius left us a potent question for these moments. What is this present moment demanding of me? Not your projected future self, the version of you holding this device right now. Maybe it's hydrating your body instead of doom scrolling about climate change. Perhaps it's fully tasting your morning coffee rather than mentally rehearsing an afternoon confrontation. The merchant who survived Constantinople's fall by focusing on each stitch as he repaired his escape boat understood this. His mended seams held because his attention didn't wander to the cannons. So here's the challenge. Pick one routine act you perform today: washing dishes, walking the dog, folding laundry. For just 3 minutes, immerse completely in its sensory details: the soap's citrus scent, the leash's tension, the fabric's warmth. Whenever thoughts dart to future worries, gently return to the physical world. You're not meditating to escape reality. You're training like a Stoic sentry, strengthening your ability to stand guard in the present when future storms arrive. After all, the oak tree doesn't waste energy fearing next season's hurricanes. It dedicates every cell to growing sturdy in this day's soil. Thracia Petus stood before Nero's tribunal knowing his fate was sealed. The emperor had demanded his death not for any crime, but for the senator's refusal to participate in Rome's corruption. As guards approached, he calmly excused himself to another room, not to flee, but to open his veins with the same steady hand he'd used to draft legislation. His final act, instructing his son-in-law to record his parting words, "See how a man who has served the Republic can die." This wasn't despair, it was Thracia's last lesson in sovereignty. While others begged or raged against their executions, he demonstrated that how we exit matters as much as how we live, a Stoic principle etched in history's darkest hours. History remembers figures like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, but lesser-known Stoics like Thracia reveal the philosophy's power in extremis. Consider Publius Clodius Thracia, a Stoic poet in Byzantium's final days. When Ottoman soldiers stormed his neighborhood, he didn't barricade his door or curse the invaders. He sat at his desk completing an epic poem about human resilience, later found beside his body with the ink still wet. Then there's Portia Cotto, daughter of the famous Stoic Cotto the Younger. After her husband Brutus died at Philippi, she didn't succumb to grief. She organized his unpublished writings, ensuring his ideas outlasted Rome's republic, then chose to starve herself rather than live under tyranny. These weren't passive victims, they were architects of meaning until their last breath. Contrast their exits with those who fought change violently. Emperor Nero, when finally cornered by rebels, couldn't muster the courage to face his end. He fled Rome disguised as a slave, whimpering, What an artist dies in me, a far cry from Thracia's composed farewell, or the Byzantine nobleman Laucus Notaras, who'd spent years scheming against rivals, only to beg for mercy when the Ottomans seized his family. His final moments were spent bargaining, then screaming as the executioner's blade fell. The difference wasn't circumstance, both groups faced annihilation but philosophy. One clung to externals, the other anchored themselves in what no sword could touch, their ability to choose their stance. These stories aren't about glorifying martyrdom. They're blueprints for meeting irreversible change with agency. When the Han Dynasty collapsed, the scholar official Zhuge Liang could have joined warlords scrambling for power. Instead, he retreated to his library, compiling texts on governance that would stabilize the next era. His journal entry reads, "When the bridge burns behind you, build a raft from the books you've read." Modern parallels emerge in figures like the Chernobyl engineer Alexander Akimov, who knowingly exposed himself to lethal radiation to secure the reactor, not with fanfare but with focused duty. Or the Japanese diplomat Chiyun Sugihara, who defied his government to issue visas for Jewish refugees as war loomed, later saying, "I obeyed the best part of my conscience." So who are your role models for adversity? Not the untouchable heroes, but the flawed humans who transformed helplessness into intentional action. Maybe it's the grandmother who survived displacement by focusing on preserving family recipes rather than lamenting lost homes. Or the teacher in a failing school district who channels energy into individual students instead of raging at broken systems. The Stoic question isn't, "How do I avoid this?" but "How do I meet this in a way that honors what I value?" Thracia didn't control Nero's cruelty, but he controlled whether fear dictated his final moments. That choice echoes through time, not as a demand for perfection, but an invitation to ask, when your world shakes, what unshakable part of yourself will you lean on? Seneca once observed that we don't receive a short life, we make it short by wasting it. Writing from a Rome plagued by excess and instability, he watched wealthy aristocrats fret over property lines while ignoring the fleeting nature of their own breaths. His essay on the shortness of life wasn't morbid, it was liberating. By confronting mortality head-on, the Stoics performed a radical act. They turned time from an enemy into an ally. Imagine two merchants in Pompeii the morning Vesuvius erupted. One clutched his ledger, screaming at slaves to save his silver. The other, who'd practiced Stoic memento mori exercises, gathered his family and whispered, "However this ends, we've truly lived." Both perished, but only one met the ash cloud with open hands. This practice wasn't about dwelling on death's inevitability, but sharpening life's intensity. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations while camped on battlefields, reminding himself that even emperors become skeletons. Yet instead of paralyzing him, this awareness fueled his decisions: to govern justly, to cherish his children, to waste no day on petty grievances. Modern psychology calls this the death awareness effect. Studies show that when people briefly reflect on mortality, they're more likely to prioritize relationships over trivial conflicts and savor ordinary moments. The Stoics discovered this 2,000 years earlier. When Constantinople's citizens saw Ottoman flags on the horizon, those who'd contemplated impermanency didn't hoard gold. They traded treasures for one last meal with loved ones, or rushed to finish artworks they'd postponed. Today's existential anxieties take different forms but spring from the same root. The pandemic's early days revealed it. People didn't panic over missed flights, but over missed graduations and unrealized reconciliations. Seneca would nod knowingly, "You act like mortals in all you fear and like immortals in all you desire." Our modern illusion isn't that we'll live forever, but that we'll eventually live fully once the inbox is cleared, the savings account padded. Stoicism shatters this delusion with a simple question. What if this is your eventual? Here's the twist the Stoics uncovered. Accepting life's fragility doesn't mean abandoning long-term goals. It means pursuing them with the urgency of someone who knows time is borrowed. Take Hiroo Onoda, the Japanese soldier who kept fighting WW2 for 29 years after it ended. When finally convinced in 1974, he didn't collapse in regret. He became a rancher, married, and opened survival schools. His memoir reads like Stoic scripture. I wasted decades defending a lost cause because I feared death. Then I learned that fearing death is what makes life feel lost. Try this reframe today. That project you've postponed, write the first paragraph now, not because you might die tomorrow, but because today is the only day you're guaranteed to live. The grudge you're nursing, picture your last conversation with that person. Would this disagreement matter? When the Roman architect Vitruvius designed aqueducts, he inscribed them with tempus fugit, not as a threat, but as a dedication. This stands because I built it now, not someday. The challenge isn't to live as if each day were your last. That would paralyze anyone. It's to live as if this day counts because it's the only one you can truly direct. The Byzantines had a custom of placing skulls on banquet tables, not to kill joy but to season it. Their toast, eat, drink, and build for tomorrow. The mortar may dry without you. What walls could you lay today if you stopped waiting for a safer someday? Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who endured exile and political persecution, had an unexpected piece of advice for his students: laugh often and laugh well. At first glance, this seems out of place in a philosophy associated with stern self-discipline. But the Stoics understood something modern psychology confirms: laughter isn't a distraction from hardship, it's a survival tool. Rufus didn't advocate mindless escapism. He taught that humor, when wielded with intention, could puncture the pomposity of fear and reveal adversity in its true proportion. When Nero's agents interrogated him about his subversive teachings, Rufus reportedly chuckled and said, "If my ideas are dangerous, why does the empire still stand?" His jailers expected groveling or defiance, not a punchline that exposed the absurdity of their intimidation. History's darkest chapters are dotted with these flashes of defiant levity. During the Black Death, Italian physician Gentile da Foligno continued teaching students while wearing a beaked plague mask filled with herbs. When a terrified patient asked if the outfit meant death was certain, he deadpanned, "No, but it improves my chances of outliving your panic." Centuries later, as Ottoman cannons pounded Constantinople's walls, Byzantine defenders painted caricatures of Sultan maimed on their shields, not just to mock, but to remind themselves that even conquerors are mortal men. These weren't acts of denial. They were psychological jiu-jitsu, using humor to transform overwhelming dread into something manageable. The Stoic distinction lies in the type of laughter they cultivated. Seneca warned against cruel mockery or nervous giggling, praising instead the laughter of perspective, the kind that arises when we recognize how small our troubles are in the grand sweep of time. He described a senator who fretted over a wine stain on his toga until someone joked, "Worry less about the purple blot and more about the bloodstains your policies cause." The burn was sharp, but it served a purpose, shaking the man out of petty vanity. Modern studies on trauma survivors reveal a similar pattern. Those who develop what psychologists call tragic humor, a finding lightness without minimizing pain, recover resilience faster than those who drown in solemnity. So where does this leave us when facing personal storms? Try Rufus' exercise. Identify one current worry, then exaggerate it to absurdity, stressed about a work presentation. Picture yourself delivering it in a clown nose, anxious about finances, imagine explaining your budget to Julius Caesar. The goal isn't to trivialize real concerns, but to create enough mental distance to see them clearly. When the Roman satirist Juvenal wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than reality," he might have added, "Sometimes the quickest escape from that prison is a well-timed joke." Consider the modern equivalents. A nurse during the pandemic who dubbed her PPE the astronaut suit found the daily struggle a little lighter. A Ukrainian soldier defending Kiev against Russian tanks posted TikTok dances in bomb craters, not because war wasn't horrific, but because joy became his act of resistance. The Stoics would recognize these as updated versions of their own practices. As Marcus Aurelius wrote while battling Germanic tribes, the obstacle becomes the way when you learn to whistle in the dark. Here's the invitation. Pick one weight you're carrying: a strained relationship, a looming deadline, a health scare. Now ask, where's the hidden punchline? Not to avoid the seriousness, but to reclaim your footing within it. The Byzantines who joked while stacking sandbags against Ottoman cannons weren't ignoring the danger. They were proving that even in the shadow of collapse, the human spirit can still choose its stance. Sometimes courage looks like a sword, sometimes it looks like a smile. The grand marble columns of Rome's forums stood for centuries, their polished surfaces reflecting the certainty of an empire that seemed eternal. Merchants grew rich trading under their shadow, politicians built careers assuming the system would endure, and ordinary citizens tucked their savings into homes they believed would shelter generations. Then the Visigoths arrived, in 410, when Alaric's forces breached the gates. The illusion shattered like a clay pot on those same marble floors. The Stoics had warned against this exact delusion for generations. Seneca, watching Rome's elite scramble to protect their villas as political winds shifted, wrote, "You built your house on the shore. Now you're surprised the tide came in." His critique wasn't cynical, it was clinical. The problem wasn't enjoying stability while it lasted. It was mistaking temporary conditions for permanent ones. History's collapses reveal this pattern with brutal clarity. Byzantine nobles who'd memorized every intricacy of court protocol found themselves useless when Ottoman cannons reduced their palaces to rubble. Their expertise in flattering emperors couldn't light a fire or dress a wound. Meanwhile, the Stoic-minded, like the scholar Georgios Gemistos Plethon, had spent years cultivating portable skills, philosophy that could be taught in any courtyard, medical knowledge transcribed into pocket-sized codices. They understood what modern survivalists call the brittleness of over-specialization. When systems fail, the person who knows how to think often outlasts the one who only knows how to obey. Fast forward to today's dependencies. We anchor our security in pension plans, assuming markets will always rebound, in degrees that guarantee careers, in algorithms that promise to connect us forever. The Stoics would ask, what happens when the infrastructure vanishes, not to incite panic but to provoke preparation? During the 2008 financial crash, those who diversified their skills, the banker who could also repair cars, the realtor who gardened, fared better than those whose entire identity was tied to a single crumbling industry. Like the Roman craftsmen who transitioned from building temples to fortifying city walls, adaptability became their real currency. Consider the modern equivalents of Rome's marble illusions. The influencer whose livelihood depends on a single platform's algorithm. The suburban family with 3 months' savings but no idea how to grow food. Even our digital lives, thousands of photos stored in clouds we don't control. Relationships maintained through apps that could vanish with a corporate decision. The Byzantine monk John of Damascus practiced a Stoic alternative. He committed entire theological texts to memory while copying others onto durable vellum. Double redundancy. Today that might look like keeping hard drives of essential documents or maintaining offline friendships that don't require servers to sustain. Here's the uncomfortable question the Stoics would pose. How much of your daily routine relies on systems you didn't build and can't repair? The Roman engineer who understood aqueducts could always find work. The senator who only knew how to lobby, his relevance died with the political machine. Modern parallels emerge in those who learn coding versus those who only use apps, or homeowners who understand circuit breakers versus those who panic during blackouts. This isn't about becoming a survivalist, it's about recognizing that true security isn't found in unshakable institutions, but in your own unshakable capacity to adapt. The exercise is simple but revealing. List 3 pillars of your current stability, maybe your job, your health insurance, your social media presence. Now imagine each vanished tomorrow. What skills or relationships would still remain? The Stoics called this the poverty drill, not to breed fear but to uncover hidden resilience. When the Han Dynasty collapsed, scholars who'd memorized Confucian classics became wandering teachers, their minds the only libraries left. Today's version might be the marketer who realizes her real asset isn't her corporate title, but her ability to persuade and problem-solve skills that translate across crises. There's a reason Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations on military campaigns. He knew firsthand that walls fall, but the discipline to rebuild them doesn't. The merchant who survived Constantinople's fall by trading language lessons for bread understood this. His wealth wasn't in his burned shop, but in his ability to communicate across cultures. Your turn. Look around at the structures you lean on, which are marble and which are muscle. The answer might determine not just how you weather collapse, but how you thrive in its aftermath. Zeno of Citium was mid-voyage when a storm shattered his merchant ship against the rocks, drowning his cargo and leaving him stranded in Athens with nothing but the soaked clothes on his back. Most would see ruin in that moment. Zeno saw a blank slate. Wandering into a bookstore, he stumbled upon Socrates' teachings, and in that shipwreck's aftermath, an entire philosophy was born. Stoicism's founder didn't just recover from loss, he transformed it into a new identity, proving that sometimes destruction isn't an ending, but the necessary friction for reinvention. The Athenians later joked that his misfortune was the most profitable shipwreck in history, not because he regained his wealth, but because he discovered a richer purpose. This story isn't just ancient inspiration, it's a masterclass in what modern psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the ability to not just endure crises, but to metabolize them into something stronger. Consider the Byzantine scribe who lost his monastery to invaders, only to realize his true calling wasn't copying texts, but teaching children under olive trees. Or the Roman glassblower whose workshop burned during the Great Fire, pushing him to experiment with molten sand and accidentally perfecting window panes that would later illuminate cathedrals. The Stoics recognized a pattern. The most resilient survivors weren't those with rigid plans, but those who could alchemize loss into unexpected opportunity. Today's world demands this same flexibility. The corporate lawyer who becomes a mindfulness coach after burnout isn't failing, they're following Zeno's path. The factory worker who retrains as a solar technician isn't abandoning their past. They're honoring the Stoic insight that identity isn't a prison, but a set of skills waiting to be repurposed. When the pandemic erased entire industries overnight, those who thrived weren't the ones clinging to obsolete job titles, but those who asked, "What transferable strengths do I still possess?" Like the Roman merchants who pivoted from shipping grain to repairing siege engines during wars, adaptability became their lifeline. The key lies in distinguishing core capacities from temporary containers. Zeno didn't stop being a problem solver when his ship sank. He simply applied that skill to philosophy instead of trade. Modern parallels abound. A journalist laid off from newspapers might discover her investigative instincts flourish in podcasting. An athlete sidelined by injury could channel discipline into coaching. The Stoics called this the inner citadel, the indestructible skills and values no external event can confiscate. When the Han Dynasty collapsed, bureaucrats versed in administration became advisors to warlords. Their organizational genius remained, even as the government that employed it crumbled. So here's the unsettling question. What wreckage in your life might actually be an invitation to rebuild smarter? Not every loss is a blessing, but every loss contains data about what's truly non-negotiable. The Byzantine architect who survived Constantinople's fall by teaching Italian nobles mosaic techniques revealed a truth. Our gifts often outlive the platforms that first showcased them. Try this exercise. List 3 roles or titles you currently hold: parent, manager, artist. Now mentally strip away the context around each one. If you could no longer express these roles in familiar ways, how else might they manifest? The answer isn't just contingency planning its liberation. Zeno's shipwreck proved that sometimes the universe doesn't take things away, it forcibly upgrades them. The merchants who adapted fastest to Rome's collapse weren't the wealthiest, but those who'd quietly cultivated diverse skills beyond their official trade. Your turn, that disruption you fear, it might not be the end of your story, but the plot twist that makes it extraordinary. After all, the same waves that sink ships also polish stones into gems. The choice isn't whether change will come, but whether you'll let it leave you stranded, or launch you toward shores you'd never have chosen, but were meant to discover. Silence wasn't empty space to the Stoics, it was the fertile ground where clarity took root. Marcus Aurelius, despite ruling an empire at war, carved out solitary hours before dawn to write in his journal, calling these moments his conversations with himself. Picture him in the dim light of a military tent on the Danube frontier, the weight of legions and plagues pressing on his shoulders, yet deliberately turning inward. He wasn't escaping responsibility, he was fortifying his mind to meet it. Nowhere can a man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. He wrote, a startling claim from a man whose days were anything but quiet. This paradox lies at the heart of Stoic solitude, not the luxury of withdrawal, but the discipline of finding stillness within the storm. History's upheavals reveal how solitude became a strategic tool. Seneca, exiled to Corsica's rugged coast, transformed his isolation into a laboratory for resilience. Instead of railing against his banishment, he studied the rhythms of waves and wrote letters dissecting his own emotions like a surgeon analyzing anatomy. Centuries later, Byzantine monks during the iconoclast persecutions retreated to Cappadocia's caves, not to hide from the world, but to preserve texts and recalibrate their purpose. Their solitude wasn't passive, it was an active recalibration, like an archer stepping back to steady his aim before releasing the arrow. Modern life bombards us with noise, literal and digital, making intentional silence feel radical. But the Stoics would argue that retreats needn't involve mountain hermitages. Consider the Roman magistrate who practiced city solitude, sitting anonymously in bustling marketplaces to observe without participating. Or the Stoic merchant who paused midday in temple courtyards, not to pray, but to untangle complex decisions away from clients' demands. Their methods adapt effortlessly today. A 5-minute elevator ride spent eyes closed instead of scrolling, a lunch break walked without headphones, or the simple act of leaving your phone in another room while you drink your morning coffee. These aren't escapes from life, they're lifelines to it. The neuroscience behind this practice is striking. Studies on resting state networks show that brains process complex problems more effectively during periods of unfocused quiet. Like a snow globe settling, undistracted time allows mental fragments to organize. The Byzantine general Belisarius, facing overwhelming odds against the Ostrogoths, was known to disappear into his tent for hours before battles. His officers assumed he was strategizing, but his journals later revealed he was practicing deliberate stillness, what modern athletes call the quiet eye technique, to sharpen decision-making under pressure. Try this modern twist on Marcus' habit. For 1 week, designate a solitude anchor, a recurring moment where you disconnect to reconnect. It could be the first 3 minutes after parking your car, spent noticing your breath before stepping into the day's demands. Or a screen sunset 30 minutes before bed, replacing devices with journaling or simply staring at the ceiling. The key lies in consistency, not duration. Even Epictetus, teaching in noisy Roman streets, had his students practice micro-retreats, closing their eyes mid-conversation to locate their center before responding. Here's the challenge hidden in these quiet spaces. That problem gnawing at you, the stalled project, the strained relationship. When did you last sit with it in uninterrupted silence? Not to brainstorm solutions, but to listen to what the situation itself might be teaching you. The Stoics believed wisdom often spoke in whispers, drowned out by the drumbeat of daily urgency. Like the Roman architect who solved aqueduct flaws not through frantic calculation, but by studying water's natural flow in quiet ponds, we too might find that stillness doesn't create distance from our challenges, it reveals their truer shape. After all, even in Constantinople's final chaotic hours, the wisest citizens weren't those shouting loudest, but those who knew when to step back, breathe, and ask, what part of this storm is mine to navigate? Seneca's treatise on anger reads like a field manual for emotional survival in turbulent times, written not from the safety of a scholar's desk, but amid the political bloodsport of Nero's Rome. He described anger as a brief insanity, a fire that burns the vessel carrying it. Picture 2 senators reacting to the same betrayal during Caligula's purges. One erupts in public condemnation, sealing his fate. The other, trained in Stoic principles, feels the heat of rage rise in his chest, then pauses. He asks Seneca's pivotal question, will this emotion improve the situation or merely indulge my pain? That split-second interrogation of anger's utility often meant the difference between survival and suicide in imperial Rome. History's collapsing empires reveal this dichotomy in stark relief. When the Visigoths sacked Rome in 410, some citizens formed violent mobs targeting immigrants and political scapegoats. Others, likely influenced by Stoic circles, organized neighborhood watches and food distribution. Both groups faced the same catastrophe, but one channeled fury into destruction, the other into creation. Fast forward to Byzantium's fall in 1453, while certain factions burned their own city in defiance. Stoic-leaning scholars like George S. Francis focused on smuggling manuscripts to safety. The lesson: anger doesn't vanish in crises. It gets distilled to its essence, revealing whether it's fuel for chaos or catalyst for solutions. Modern outrage culture mirrors these ancient fractures. Social media algorithms thrive on collective anger, rewarding viral indignation with dopamine hits. A politician's gaffe or corporate misstep triggers tidal waves of performative fury outbursts that feel cathartic but rarely affect change. Seneca would recognize this pattern instantly. He warned that uncontrolled anger is more ruinous than the things which arouse it, pointing to Roman mobs who destroyed their own aqueducts during protests, only to later die of thirst. The Stoic alternative: transform anger's energy into targeted action. Instead of ranting online about climate change, join a local conservation effort. Rather than seething over workplace unfairness, document patterns and propose policy revisions. Consider the physiological wisdom beneath this approach. When we rage, cortisol floods our system, narrowing focus to immediate threats while blinding us to long-term solutions. The Stoics anticipated modern neuroscience by 2 millennia with their pause and assess method. Marcus Aurelius journaled about imagining looking down on conflicts from a mountaintop, a cognitive distancing technique now validated by studies showing that third-person perspective reduces emotional reactivity. Byzantine diplomats used similar strategies during peace negotiations with aggressive neighbors, consciously lowering their voices when counterparts shouted, disrupting the anger feedback loop. Seneca's most radical idea was that anger often masks helplessness. No one continues angry unless they believe it gives them power. He wrote, "Test this against modern grievances." The commuter fuming in traffic isn't truly empowered by honking. They're compensating for their inability to control the gridlock. The Stoic remedy: redirect that energy toward variables you can influence. Adjust your departure time, discover alternate routes, or use the delay for audiobook learning. When barbarians besieged Roman cities, the most resilient citizens weren't those screaming at the walls, but those repurposing anger into preparation, forging makeshift weapons from farm tools, digging emergency wells. Here's the challenge hidden in on anger. Next time outrage sparks in your chest, conduct Seneca's 3-part audit. First, identify the underlying hurt, often fear, injustice, or thwarted expectations. Second, assess whether the target of your anger is even reachable. Ranting at distant CEOs rarely achieves more than elevating your blood pressure. Finally, transform the heat into motion. The Byzantine craftsman who redirected fury over Ottoman taxes into perfecting a new masonry technique didn't just soothe his emotions, he left a legacy that outlasted the empire. Your modern equivalent might be converting frustration with healthcare systems into volunteering at free clinics, or reshaping political disillusionment into grassroots organizing. The ultimate Stoic insight about anger isn't that we should never feel it, but that we must never let it feel us. Like fire in a forge, properly contained fury can shape stronger tools. Left unchecked, it reduces everything to ash. When Rome burned under Nero, Seneca didn't waste breath cursing the emperor. He coordinated relief efforts and penned letters about human resilience. That's the choice still before us. Will our anger be the spark that ignites mobs, or the flame that tempers steel? Musonius Rufus stood in the marketplace of 1st century Rome, watching merchants haggle over prices that inflated by the hour. Unlike the panicked crowds clutching their coin purses, the Stoic teacher remained calm. He'd spent years refining a radical idea: that economic turmoil couldn't impoverish those who'd mastered the art of needing little. Wealth isn't measured by what fills your coffers, he taught, but by what you can walk away from without regret. This wasn't philosophy for ivory towers, it was survival strategy during an era when emperors like Nero routinely debased currency, rendering savings worthless overnight. While elites scrambled to protect their assets, Rufus' students practiced what he called voluntary discomfort, sleeping on thin mats, eating simple meals, mending their own clothes. Not as punishment, but as preparation, they understood what modern economists now confirm: financial resilience isn't about how much you own, but how little you require to thrive. The parallels between ancient inflation and modern recessions are startling. When Rome's denarius lost 90% of its value in the 3rd century, citizens who tied their security to gold coins found themselves starving amidst theoretical wealth. Fast forward to 2008. Homeowners who'd maxed out mortgages on sprawling properties discovered that square footage couldn't be eaten when markets collapsed. Rufus would nod knowingly at today's doom spending trends, the frantic luxury purchases masking deeper economic anxieties. His alternative, the freedom audit, regularly subtracting conveniences to prove they weren't necessities. A Roman senator might spend a week wearing his slave's tunic to confirm his dignity wasn't stitched into purple fabric. Today's equivalent, the tech worker who rediscovers the library after canceling streaming subscriptions, realizing entertainment wasn't $100 monthly line item but a borrowed book and a park bench. Frugality as empowerment takes unexpected forms across history. During Byzantium's economic crises, Stoic-leaning merchants pioneered barter networks that outlasted failed currencies, a physician trading herbal knowledge for a blacksmith's repairs. In Argentina's 2001 collapse, neighborhoods revived these ancient practices, exchanging guitar lessons for plumbing work. The lesson isn't that money is evil, but that reliance on any single system creates fragility. Rufus drilled his students in multiform competence, the ability to provision needs through varied means. A patrician's daughter might learn herbology not as a hobby, but because apothecaries would still trade remedies when coins became scrap metal. Modern applications abound. The office worker who studies basic auto repair avoids predatory loans when her car falters. The suburbanite growing tomatoes reduces vulnerability to supply chain shocks. Consider the hidden tax of complexity. The Roman aristocrat overseeing 50 estates spent more time managing stewards and quelling slave revolts than enjoying his wealth. Rufus called this the golden yoke, possessions that ultimately possess their owners. Today's version, the six-figure earner working 80-hour weeks to maintain luxury cars and vacation homes, too exhausted to derive joy from either. Simplicity's gift isn't just savings, it's sovereignty over time. When recession looms, those accustomed to lavish routines face agonizing cuts, while the intentionally frugal experience barely a ripple. Like the Byzantine scholar who treasured his single oil lamp because it illuminated Aristotle as well as any chandelier, they'd discovered a Stoic secret: minimizing wants maximizes freedom. So where does this leave us in an age of algorithmic consumerism? Start with Rufus' nightly reflection. What did I use today that money didn't provide? Maybe it was the friend who talked you through a crisis or the public park that refreshed your spirit. These aren't small comforts, they're the foundation of an economy no market crash can destroy. The merchant who survived Rome's collapse by trading language lessons for bread knew this. His wealth wasn't in his burned warehouse, but in his ability to connect across cultures. Your turn, that subscription you barely use, the closet overflowing with unworn clothes. What if pruning them didn't feel like deprivation, but like shedding weights before a swim across uncertain waters? The Stoics would remind you, storms don't sink ships because of the water outside, but because of what the crew insisted on carrying inside. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who transformed his experience as a slave into a masterclass on inner freedom, offered an unexpected metaphor for modern ears. Imagine an archer pulling back his bow. His control extends only to the strength of his grip, the steadiness of his aim, the release of the string. Once the arrow flies, whether it hits the target depends on the wind, the distance, forces beyond his command. Would the archer be wiser to chase after the arrow, screaming at the skies to change course, or to knock another arrow and focus on what's still within his hands? This image cuts to the heart of the Stoic paradox that true power begins when we stop straining against the uncontrollable and redirect that energy toward our own stance, our own aim. History's upheavals reveal this principle in action. When a fire swept through Rome in 64, Nero's advisors wasted precious hours debating who to blame, while Stoic-aligned senators organized bucket brigades, not because they could single-handedly stop the flames, but because directing water was within their reach while the emperor's tantrums were not. Centuries later, as Constantinople's walls crumbled under Ottoman cannon fire, the scholar Georgios Trapezuntios didn't waste breath cursing the gunners. He gathered students in a basement, translating Aristotle into Italian by lamplight. Both understood Epictetus' lesson. Exhaustion comes not from effort, but from effort misplaced from trying to command tides instead of learning to swim. Modern burnout mirrors this ancient trap. The manager micromanaging her team's every email signature, the parent scripting their child's every playdate, the activist raging at headlines they can't unprint. All are exhausting themselves chasing arrows mid-flight. Stoicism diagnoses this as a category error, mistaking influence for control. You can model integrity for your co-workers, but not dictate their ethics. You can pack nutritious lunches for your kids, but not engineer their appetites. You can protest unjust laws, but not will legislators' hearts to change. The Roman admiral who survived storms by adjusting his sails rather than shouting at the clouds knew this distinction intimately. Here's the liberating twist the Stoics uncovered. Surrendering the illusion of control doesn't weaken agency, it sharpens it. Like the archer who stops blaming the wind and starts studying it, we become more effective when we discern between resistance and adaptation. Consider the Byzantine doctor facing plague with limited medicines. He couldn't cure the disease, but he could perfect pain-relieving techniques, leaving behind manuals that would save lives in future outbreaks. Or the modern employee who accepts she can't single-handedly reverse layoffs but audits her transferable skills, transforming anxiety into preparation. So try Epictetus audit. List 3 stressors weighing on you right now. Now draw 2 columns, what's yours to govern and what's not, that difficult relative. You can't control their behavior, only your boundaries, the traffic jam. You can't unclog the highway, but you can curate a playlist that makes the wait bearable. The Stoic farmer who lost crops to drought didn't waste energy cursing the skies, he studied irrigation. The paradox is this: the moment you stop demanding the world bend to your will, you discover how much power remains in how you meet it. Epictetus, who slept on the stone floor by choice, left us a challenge. What's exhausting you that was never yours to command? The answer might reveal not helplessness, but horizons of possibility you'd overlooked. After all, even the mightiest oak doesn't rage against the storm. It digs deeper roots where it stands. Seneca once compared a meaningful life to planting trees under whose shade you may never sit. This wasn't mere poetic flourish, it was the Stoic blueprint for legacy. While Roman elites erected statues and commissioned flattering histories, Seneca and his peers invested in something subtler but more enduring: the quiet work of virtuous impact. Picture a first-century teacher in a modest Athenian stoa, shaping young minds not with grandiose lectures, but with daily questions that would echo across generations. Or the unnamed Byzantine scribe who copied crumbling texts by candlelight, knowing he might not live to see their rediscovery. Their approach to legacy wasn't about carving names in marble, but about planting seeds in souls. The Stoics recognized a profound truth: empires crumble, but ideas rooted in human character outlast them. When Marcus Aurelius penned his private meditations, he never intended them for publication, yet 2 millennia later, they guide soldiers and CEOs alike. Contrast this with Emperor Commodus' obsession with gladiatorial fame. His statues were toppled within years of his death, while Marcus' journal survived fires, wars, and the fall of Rome itself. The difference lies in what each man valued. One sought the spotlight, the other cultivated light. This principle manifests strikingly in times of collapse. As Constantinople burned in 1453, two groups emerged, those desperately trying to save personal treasures, and scholars like George of Trebizond, who risked their lives to rescue books they wouldn't live to study. The former group left behind only ashes, the latter ignited the Renaissance. Modern psychology confirms this paradox. Those who contribute without immediate recognition, mentors, volunteers, anonymous donors, report deeper life satisfaction than those chasing viral fame. The Stoic gardener doesn't fret over who will credit her for the apples. She tends the orchard because that's what good stewards do. So how does this translate today? Consider the software engineer who documents solutions in company wikis long after she's promoted, or the nurse who trains newcomers with patients she once received. These aren't just kind acts, they're the living embodiment of Seneca's shade trees. The teacher who stays late to help a struggling student may never see that child become a scientist, but the Stoics would argue that uncertainty doesn't diminish the act's worth, it elevates it. Legacy becomes not a monument to visit, but a current to join. Try this reframe. Next time you're tempted to chase external validation, ask instead, what can I plant that might outlast me? It might look like mentoring a colleague without claiming credit, preserving family stories for descendants you'll never meet, or simply modeling calm in chaos so others remember how it's done. The Byzantine monks who preserved classical texts didn't know we'd be studying them today. They only knew the work mattered. Your legacy won't be measured by what's chiseled on your tombstone, but by what grows in the spaces you tended. After all, the oldest trees in Rome weren't planted by emperors, they were sown by birds carrying seeds no one thought to count. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." These words weren't penned in a palace garden, but during a military campaign where disease and battle loomed daily. The Stoics didn't practice gratitude because life was perfect. They practiced it precisely because it wasn't. In the smoldering ruins of empires, they discovered an unexpected truth. Loss sharpens appreciation like a whetstone against steel. When Rome's borders crumbled and Constantinople's walls were breached, those who kept gratitude journals weren't denying reality. They were mapping escape routes for their sanity. Consider the merchant who returned home after the Visigoth sack of Rome to find his warehouse looted. Instead of fixating on lost silks, he noted in his journal, "The thieves left my ledger. I still know who owes me. My wife's hands are unharmed, she can still weave. The well wasn't poisoned, we still drink." This wasn't naive optimism. It was tactical focus, identifying remaining assets when despair magnified deficits. Modern psychology confirms this ancient practice. Studies on Holocaust survivors found those who cultivated gratitude, even for scraps of bread or shared jokes, exhibited remarkable psychological resilience. The Stoics had stumbled upon a neurological hack. Training the brain to spot resources amidst scarcity rewires our baseline for contentment. The Byzantine monk Simeon, the new theologian, took this further during the darkest days of imperial decline. His gratitude lists included entries like, "Today I appreciated the way sunlight fell through the hole in the roof, revealing dust motes like floating stars." At first glance, this seems absurd. Why praise a crumbling ceiling? But Simeon understood something profound. Gratitude isn't about the object, but the gaze. A pauper who notices one unbroken dish eats with more dignity than a king who complains about tarnished silver. When Ottoman cannons shook Constantinople's walls, the scholars who'd practiced this discipline didn't waste energy cursing their shaking desks. They marveled that their hands could still steady pens to preserve texts. So how do we cultivate this unshakable gratefulness? Start with the Stoic 3 gifts exercise each evening. Record one societal blessing like roads or clean water. one personal strength like your ability to mend clothes, and one fleeting pleasure like the smell of rain. The Romans who did this during plagues didn't ignore death tolls, they balanced them with entries like, "Today my daughter's laughter echoed in the courtyard, proving life persists." Modern parallels emerge in cancer wards where patients who journal small joys, a nurse's joke, the tartness of an apple, often report higher pain tolerance. Here's the challenge hiding in plain sight. What have you stopped noticing because it's always there? The Byzantine chronicler Anna Komnene wrote of soldiers who, after years at war, suddenly appreciated the mundane, the way bread crust crackles when fresh, how shadows dance on tavern walls. These weren't poetic flourishes, they were survival mechanisms. Try this today. Pick one invisible blessing, perhaps your ability to read these words, or the electricity powering your device, and mentally subtract it. Now feel its value snap into focus. The Stoics called this the poverty drill, not to breed guilt but to reactivate wonder. Gratitude journals in collapsing societies often contained paradoxical entries. One unearthed from Pompeii reads, "Grateful today for the ache in my back, proof I can still labor." Another from Constantinople's final weeks, "Thankful the invaders didn't burn the olive grove, next year's oil will taste of resilience." These records reveal gratitude's secret superpower. It doesn't require circumstances to change, only our perception of them. The merchant who loses his ship but journals, "I still know the stars to navigate," hasn't lost everything, he's retained the ultimate treasure, the ability to find treasures. So tonight, before sleep, ask the question that anchored generations in chaos. What overlooked fortresses still stand in your life? Maybe it's the neighbor who remembers your name, the skill no recession can take, or simply the miracle that your heart keeps beating without permission. As the Stoics showed, we don't journal gratitudes to ignore the fire. We do it to spot the unburned corners where new flames can rise. Ancient Stoic philosophy was never meant to be a solitary pursuit. It thrived in the shared spaces between people. Picture the painted Stoa Poikile in Athens, where Zeno first gathered his students not in solemn isolation, but in lively debate amidst the bustle of the marketplace. This tradition continued through Rome's decline, where Stoic circles met in homes and gardens to dissect texts, share hardships, and reinforce their shared commitment to wisdom. When plague emptied the streets or barbarians threatened the gates, these groups transformed into something far more practical than discussion clubs. They became networks of survival. Wealthy senators pooled resources with freedmen to feed orphans. Physicians trained neighbors in basic wound care. The bonds forged over philosophy lectures became lifelines when empires crumbled. History reveals a pattern. The most resilient Stoics were those woven into communities. Epictetus, despite his fame, lived simply in a small house with an ailing companion, insisting his students share burdens rather than remove them. When Byzantine scholars faced Ottoman siege, they didn't scatter. They formed chains to smuggle manuscripts to safety, knowing some must survive to teach future generations. Even Marcus Aurelius, the emperor-philosopher, relied on his correspondence with Fronto and shared readings with his military officers to maintain perspective during grueling campaigns. The lesson is clear: Stoicism's endurance owes as much to its communal roots as to its brilliant texts. Modern life may lack the Stoas of Athens, but the digital age offers new gathering spaces. Online forums like the Stoic Fellowship host global conversations at all hours. Local meetups from London to Tokyo practice Seneca's exercise of shared self-examination, where members discuss challenges through a Stoic lens. Even virtual book clubs dissecting meditations chapter by chapter recreate the collaborative learning of ancient study circles. The key isn't the platform, it's the intentional cultivation of relationships where principles become practice. Imagine a group where layoffs are reframed as opportunities for reinvention, where health scares prompt discussions on amor fati rather than panic. These are the modern equivalents of Byzantine monks preserving light in dark times. So who comprises your Stoic network? It might be a co-worker who shares your interest in philosophy, a family member willing to discuss Epictetus over Sunday dinners, or an online accountability partner for morning reflections. The exercise is simple but profound. Identify one person this week with whom you can exchange Stoic insights not as abstract theory, but as lived response to real challenges. When a Roman merchant lost his shipment to pirates, his Stoic circle didn't offer platitudes. They helped him audit his remaining assets and brainstorm alternative trades. That's the model, not just discussing storms, but helping each other adjust the sails. Consider the Byzantine tradition of the symboulos, a designated advisor who combined philosophical guidance with pragmatic support. Your modern symboulos might be the friend who reminds you of Seneca's letters during career transitions, or the neighbor who trades home repairs for Stoic gardening metaphors. The goal isn't to create an echo chamber of positivity, but a forge where friction sharpens wisdom. Like the Roman soldiers who practiced Stoic drills together to stay calm in battle, we too can rehearse resilience in company. Digital tools now enable what parchment scrolls once did: the sharing of wisdom across distance. Websites like Modern Stoicism offer free courses, while apps provide daily meditation prompts. Podcasts recreate the oral teaching traditions of Musonius Rufus, but technology serves best when it bridges to tangible connection. The video call where friends analyze a shared hardship through the dichotomy of control, or the group chat that transforms complaints into constructive action plans. The Ottoman canons couldn't silence the Byzantine scholars whispering lessons in hiding. Today's noise needn't drown out our collective pursuit of clarity. Here's the challenge hidden in these ancient networks: resilience compounds when shared. Identify one person in your existing circles, a colleague, relative, or gym buddy, who might join you in a fortnightly Stoic coffee. Not to preach philosophy, but to ask Seneca's favorite question: what progress have you made? The Roman matron who hosted philosophy salons knew this wisdom grows best when rooted in relationship. Your turn: who could walk with you not just through sunshine, but through the storms where Stoic principles matter most? After all, even the sturdiest oak stands stronger when part of a forest. We've journeyed through the Stoic toolkit, accepting what we can't change, focusing on what we control, transforming obstacles into fuel. But here's the truth the ancients knew: philosophy only becomes wisdom when it leaves the page and enters your daily rhythm. Imagine a Roman merchant reading Epictetus by lamplight, then closing the scroll to practice the dichotomy of control as his ship sinks, or a Byzantine scholar reciting Marcus Aurelius' meditations while packing manuscripts into chests, knowing the Ottomans might breach the walls by dawn. They didn't just admire Stoic ideas, they wore them like armor. So let's bridge contemplation and action. Start small, but start today. Pick one Stoic exercise, just one, and let it breathe in your life this week. Maybe it's the morning premeditatio malorum, where you visualize challenges ahead not to dread them, but to disarm their power. Picture your commute disrupted, your Wi-Fi failing, your plans unraveling, then ask what strengths would still remain. This isn't pessimism, it's emotional inoculation. Like the Roman soldiers who trained in full armor under summer sun to make battle feel lighter, you're preparing your mind to carry weight without buckling. Or try Epictetus' evening audit. Before sleep, review the day with two questions. Where did I invest energy in what wasn't mine to control? Where did I neglect my agency? The Byzantines, who survived siege after siege, didn't do so by obsessing over the enemy's numbers. They focused on shoring up their own walls, rationing their own supplies. Your modern version might reveal you spent hours agonizing over a co-worker's opinion externals, while postponing that skill-building course internals. The goal isn't self-judgment, it's course correction. For those craving tangible rituals, adopt Seneca's poverty drill. Choose one comfort to voluntarily forego this week. Take cold showers, skip the takeout, leave your phone behind on a walk. Like Cato walking barefoot through Rome's winter streets, you're not punishing yourself. You're proving that joy isn't hostage to convenience. When the merchant of Constantinople lost his silks to invaders, his real wealth was the calluses on his hands, proof he could create value from nothing. Here's the invitation: don't just consume Stoicism, converse with it. Journal as Marcus did, not with eloquence but honesty. Wrestle with a single Stoic quote each morning. You have power over your mind, not outside events, and interrogate how it applies to your looming meeting or family tension. The Roman architect Vitruvius didn't master his craft by skimming scrolls. He tested principles against stone and mortar. Your life is the workshop where philosophy becomes fortitude. So as this discussion closes, one question remains: which Stoic idea will you press into the clay of your days this week? Will it be the amor fati that turns a delayed flight into unexpected reading time? The circles of concern that nudge you to buy coffee for the exhausted cashier? Remember, the Byzantines didn't preserve civilization in a single heroic act. They did it by copying one line of text after another, day after day, while the world burned outside their doors. Your practice doesn't need grandeur to be transformative. Even the mightiest oak begins as a sapling bending in the wind. The collapse of empires, whether marble monuments or modern certainties, has always been the ultimate test of human resilience. But here's the Stoic secret buried in history's rubble. Every ending carries the blueprint for a stronger beginning. Look at the Roman merchants who reinvented trade routes after barbarians severed old ones, or the Byzantine scholars who transformed from court officials to wandering teachers, carrying wisdom like seeds in their pockets. What seemed like destruction was often just life's ruthless way of clearing space for what couldn't be toppled, the inner citadel of character. This is the heart of Stoicism's gift, not a shield against change, but the alchemy to transmute it. Let's retrace the path we've walked together. First, the liberating power of distinguishing what's yours to govern, your judgments, your efforts, your values from the storms you can only weather. Like the watchman on Hadrian's wall who conserved energy by focusing on his sword's edge rather than the distant horde, clarity about control turns panic into purposeful action. Next, resilience forged through voluntary discomfort, the cold showers and frugal meals that train you to find abundance in simplicity. Just as Musonius Rufus' students discovered joy in needing less when Rome's economy crumbled. Then presence, Marcus Aurelius' dawn meditations amidst battlefields, proving that anchoring in the now isn't retreat, but reconnaissance for the soul. And finally, virtue as the ultimate currency, the way Thracia Petus met Nero's executioners with a serenity no sword could pierce. Marcus Aurelius left us words that ring across centuries. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Imagine the Roman general who whispered this to himself as Germanic tribes massed beyond the palisade, or the Byzantine mother reciting it while rocking her child during cannon fire. That power remains yours today when algorithms hijack attention, when markets tremble, when personal worlds shake. The Stoics didn't just survive history's upheavals, they documented how to thrive within them, turning collapse into curriculum. Now it's your turn. Which Stoic principle will you test first? The morning journaling ritual, the evening audit of what truly depended on you? Share your insights below. Let's build a modern Stoa in these comments where wisdom outlasts empires. And if you're ready to keep sharpening your inner citadel, subscribe for more timeless strategies, because the next storm isn't a question of if, but whether you'll face it as a victim of the gales or like the oak that bends to grow deep.